Hi, this is Matt with State of Flux here with another Everyone's a Critic 52-week movie challenge. We are on, I think we're actually caught up now, week 35, a book adaptation. The movie I chose, Twilight. Year release 2008, aspect ratio 2351, runtime 2 hours and 2 minutes. The genre, romance or fantasy, or romantasy? Rated PG-13, starring Kristen Stewart, Robert Pattinson, Taylor Lautner, Ashley Greene, and Billy Burke. Directed by Catherine Hardwicke. Produced by Summit Pictures. Written by Melissa Rosenberg. Based on a book by Stephanie Meyer. Music by Carter Burwell. Awards received, it received a slew of MTV Movie Awards, including Best Movie, Best Actress, Breakthrough Performance for Robert Pattinson, Best Kiss, and Best Fight. Why did you choose this particular film? I'm hosting bar trivia, and in order to develop the trivia questions, I needed to rewatch the Twilight Saga. So that's literally the only reason why I did. The previous, when I opened up the assignment last week, I saw that this was it. I was like, I'll just use the movie that I most recently watched. Have I seen this movie before? Lamentably, yes. I watched it in theaters when it first came out. Would I recommend this movie? Why or why not? I couldn't possibly recommend this movie. No, it's not a good movie. I read each of the books. Coming to the Twilight, I was a big Buffy the Vampire Slayer fan, and I was looking circa 2006-ish, 2007, for a more Buffy-like thing, and somebody had recommended this book. They're like, oh, if you like Buffy, especially the Buffy-Angel relationship, you'll like this book. So I went to the store, I bought Twilight, and I was disgusted with what I read. But then I kept getting hit with, because it was part of a series, oh, don't worry, it gets better. Read book 2, read book 3, read book 4. And then when the movie came out, I had friends that were interested in the books, so we watched the movie, and then it just kind of got to be a thing where I've read all the books, seen all the movies. They are not for me. I have severe problems with them, and I think that first movie particularly, especially rewatching it, like, the only thing worse than the toxicity that the film professes constantly is the goddamn gray filter that they throw over the thing. Like, dear God. It's, like, damn near unwatchable. However, coming to it, 13 years later, or however long it's been, I will say that one of the things I really dinged it for the first time around is that it had in my opinion, none of the performances were good except from her dad, the Billy Burke character, and I thought that, I remember walking out of the theater and turning to my now wife and saying that the only one in the movie that could act of the kids was the girl who was the friend who's constantly talking about her boobs. She was good, and she was Anna Kendrick, and hot damn was I right. Within a year or two, she was in, like, Up in the Air, and her career took off. And I maintain she's probably the best one in the movie. But, coming back to it years later, I have to acknowledge both Kristen Stewart and Robert Pattinson are phenomenal actors. How these two deplorable kids, awkward-ass kids, just professing their love to each other throughout the entire thing, like just firm declarations of love, have zero chemistry, and this whole romance is hinged on them is beyond me, and why people, like, got wrapped up in it. Never mind the toxicity. It is all just... This movie is laughable now, especially coming to it from having watched Oscar-caliber performances from both of those lead actors. They are genuine talents of our age, and you don't really see that. There's, like, one scene in this first movie that is well acted, and it's when Bella first finds out that somebody has died in their town, talking to her dad, and Edward knows that it's likely a vampire, and the three of them are not communicating, but all three of them are perfectly responding to the situation at hand, in character. I thought that was good. And that's my recommendation. I recommend that one scene. And if you want to laugh a lot, like any time that he looks like he's trying to hold his breath, but really it looks like he's farted and he's trying to make sure nobody noticed. And when she's getting bit at the end of the movie and she's going cross-eyed. Which character were you most able to identify with or connect with, and in what way? I guess it would be the dad, because he's the only one that, like, is trying to just care for his kid, that is this dopey-ass kid that's just depressed and, like, ugh, the angst. And he's just trying to get by. He's the only one that I ever really kind of liked. I also like the Jacob character. He gets his own levels of toxicity in the sequels, but at least in the first book and the first half of the second book, he's pretty alright. Best line or most memorable quote? The say it line, that is done well. There's hints here and there that are done well, and I think the movie utilizes the location well. I didn't mention that before. The location that they filmed at is quite lovely, especially whenever they go out into those woods. Were you surprised by the ending, and what would you do differently? I was not surprised by the ending when I saw the movie. I was not necessarily surprised by the ending when I read the book. I assumed that she was going to get bit by the vampire, as she does, and that Edward would come in and save the day, because this is like perpetuating that toxic trope as well of the damsel in distress needing the hero to save her, not being able to have the wherewithal to get herself out of the situation. But I figured that that was going to be the excuse for her to become a vampire, and I was surprised while reading the book that she didn't, that he pulls the vampire venom from her and then gets lost in the feed, and all that BS. But I just assumed this was her origin story of how she became a vampire, especially with that opening monologue thing about like how I died and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I was surprised that that was something that didn't happen until quite a bit later. Have you read the book? Considering the time restrictions a movie has, did the film capture the original story well? Yes and no. Yes, I've read the book. Yes and no. Bella is such a boring character on film, because all of her character development is done through internal monologues in the book. And she's designed to be a blank slate to begin with. This film is essentially, or this book series is essentially a recontextualization of the Mormon belief structure, and some people would argue Mormon propaganda. And in that belief structure, the woman does not have, the woman is sort of like an empty vase. She has nothing to fill her until a man is able to come in and do that, and that's what this story is. She is nothing unless she is with Edward. He is the thing that sustains her and gives her life, with, you know, irony, because he's something that sucks life from people. So, yeah, and if memory serves, they really didn't lose much, if any, of the scenes. Maybe they lose a couple little story threads that aren't necessarily strictly important, but this is a pretty solid adaptation of an underwhelming book, is the long and short of it. Anything else I would like to add? I'm going to continue shitting on it, and then I'm going to pull back my shitting on Twilight. So let's start with continuing to shit on Twilight. The comparisons to Buffy the Vampire Slayer are pretty strong. You have a young human woman who is underage, who falls in love with an of age, when he was alive, vampire who is good and willfully chooses not to kill people, and finds alternate methods to sustain his own life, who's truly a 100-plus-year-old vampire, and that's where the similarities kind of begin and end. There's more similarities within the story, we'll get to that, but they deviate pretty hard because the where they land in each subsequent story with the story beats is pretty drastically different. Buffy the Vampire Slayer sort of condemns the relationship, and the whole point of Angel, he was always supposed to die. He lived on because the studio deemed it so and saw viability in David Boreanaz, but his character had a very specific endpoint, and if you've watched the show, you know exactly what that endpoint is. And that was a firm, like, nail in the coffin for the stance of the belief of having a relationship for a young woman with the older man trope. The beautiful commentary laid within that story of how, yes, there's a mad love between them, but men also have a tendency to, or people have a tendency to shield their true nature, and when Buffy and Angel consummate their relationship and he turns evil, everything on Buffy the Vampire Slayer is like, what if high school is hell? What if high school was built on a hellmouth, and everything that we encounter in high school, we can tell stories of that using allegory. So this is the story of my boyfriend, I slept with my boyfriend and he no longer calls me anymore. Put through the prism of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, he is a demon that loses his soul and now is a soulless monster and is trying to very specifically hurt the person that loves him and she thought loved her. It's a powerful story, and when they reconnect, ultimately the Buffy franchise kind of plays out like the Twilight franchise. When they do reconnect, they both come to a conscious decision, him at first, but her eventually, that they really shouldn't be together. They don't mesh. They are of different worlds, and they do the mature, correct thing of distancing themselves and learning to live on without each other. Buffy at no point is a helpless character. Bella at no point is a competent character. And that's something that I think is disastrous. And the fact that this film, Twilight, the books, the movies, did more harm than good in that they perpetuated and normalized toxic behaviors as attractive attributes of longing and of some tainted kind of love. This normalizes gaslighting. This normalizes any number of traits. Like, this is just true toxicity at its most palpable. And the fact that it normalized it for a whole generation of people seeing these films, longing for that kind of relationship and being wanted so fiercely as Edward does Bella and Bella does Edward, and Jacob to some extent. Like, that is a problem, and that was the problem when I first saw it. That's why I did not respond well to the books. I saw problems with the books, and I kept reading hoping that that would change, and it never did. Buffy the Vampire Slayer is what I would recommend you watch if you are interested in Twilight. If you like it, watch Buffy. Buffy's a much, funnier, willfully funnier. It's more creatively written, it's well written, and it's overall a profoundly great television show of its era. Sure, it's dated, but you can't look at this movie and tell me that this isn't dated either. Both are cringy, laughable in their special effects and in their fight choreography. I will say that by the end of Buffy's run, it looks pretty similar to Twilight, if not better. Just saying that. The acting is considerably better in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and I would go out on a limb and say that the actors themselves are better than the actors in Twilight, and that's saying something. But now I've shat on Twilight quite a bit. Let's pull that back. Buffy the Vampire Slayer is created by a very problematic individual, especially nowadays, and you can research that if you want. That is genuinely true. Stephanie Meyer is not a problematic individual on the same level. She wrote something that I think is genuinely disastrous to the shaping of youth for however long it was that those books were popular and maintained their popularity. And I have a fear that the resurgence of popularity of these Twilight movies is you're going to create a new generation of people longing for a toxic relationship and normalizing that. That said, we harshly abused her. People who shat on these movies, as I just did, didn't necessarily do it in an academic way as I was trying to do right now. They came at her in ways that I think are gross and just as toxic, just as demeaning, and just as disturbing as anything that this thing tries to profess. But they did it not to fictional characters or fictional story. They did it to a real woman, and that's a problem. So there's that. And for my money, she does do a lot of interesting and creative work. There's a lot of similarities, and I'm sure I would not be shocked if I had discovered that she was a fan of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, recontextualized what she liked about the Buffy-Angel relationship, ignoring the fact that that was a toxic relationship in the show that the show would eventually make, commentary on, and then developed her own thing. She changed the vampire mythos, and you could argue that you don't like what she did, but she did something interesting. She did something creative, and she did something that, at least for my money, I had not seen before. I like that. She built a compelling mythos for her vampires and her werewolves. Now, some of those things you can pull from other source material, but you can do that with any number of things. Creatively, she was an interesting writer. The story that's ultimately splayed out over Twilight, which I think is overlong, isn't a bad story, like in terms of its creative use of storytelling. And she has a firm understanding of who these characters are, and you get that she understands her world, and she paints her world well. So I don't harp on Stephanie Meyer, the person. I think she's a good author. She is somebody who understands the work. I didn't respond well and have moral, I found morally troubling her work and what she did, and I think that it's pretty concerning how many people responded to Twilight the way they did. And I don't think it's a good thing that these books attained such a wide audience that could potentially be harmed by it, but I don't put that at the fault necessarily of the author. Her intent wasn't to do that. Her intent was to tell a story. She told it well, she told it creatively. I didn't respond to it. A lot of people didn't respond to it, but attacking her is not cool. So I just wanted to sort of end with that. That's my soliloquy about Stephanie Meyer and Buffy versus Twilight. Or True Blood. You can throw True Blood into the mix. I never really responded well to True Blood. I think there's an awful lot, especially in the TV show, over-sexualization of characters, and that's its own problematic element. And I think you have the True Blood books. I tried reading those. I could only read one of them, and that didn't really do it for me either. Anyway. Moving on, next week, your favorite film. The Week 36 challenge is your favorite film. Well, we'll keep on the Joss Whedon train and talk about some more problematic material. But next week I will have a review for my favorite film. I'm actually kind of excited to talk about it, and it's been a few years since I've watched it. I haven't watched it since all the news about Whedon came out, so I'm curious to see how I respond to the film, knowing what I know now. But anyway, thanks for watching. Do you like Twilight? Am I completely off base? That's perfectly fine. Let me know. Justify your like of this story. I'm open to hearing about it. I'm always open to hearing rebuttals to my criticisms. And I will say that in watching the others, and if you want me to review the other Twilights, I absolutely will, but in watching the other ones recently, I have two under my belt. New Moon is a lot better than I remember cinematically. And maybe I'll throw a review online for New Moon. But anyway, thanks for watching. Peace.